Could you please introduce yourself? Who are you?
My name is Abraham Garcia Alvarado. I was born in Mexico City, but I grew up in New York City in the United States, and now I'm living here in Canada.
How long have you been in Canada?
4 years.
4 years.
4
You
years.
are brand new, sort of.
Yeah, I remember when I used to say that when I was in New York City. I've been here 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about Canada? How did you find? Did you like it
It's
or
Oh
expectations?
yes, I like it here. It's home now. I This is my home. It's been like everything else in life, like moving to a new place. It's been a complicated process, especially because I moved here just 2 months before the pandemic started. So immediately I was deprived of really seeing Canada because I had to stay home for basically almost 2 years. So it's been complicated, and then obviously now I can say I'm more adapted to the culture and the situation, and I'm happy with everything that I have in my life or in my community. But yes, obviously there are things that I am not used to, things that are it's hard for me to get adapted to.
I see.
Culturally speaking.
Culturally, it's a mosaic, you know. So,
Yes.
did you have any difficulties?
It's a little bit it's a little bit complicated to explain this because um the culture in Canada and the United States are very similar. Starting with the point that we speak the same language, mainly the main language is spoken in both countries is English. So that was an advantage for me because when I came to Canada, I already spoke the language. In fact, the very first time when I came in 2019, when I landed on the airport in Toronto, um, it was the first time in my life that I experienced living outside of the United States and Mexico in another country that I spoke the language and that every time they asked me a question, I felt okay answering and I felt comfortable. So in that part, the difficulty was not present at the moment because I spoke the language. I had the advantage of knowing
It's a
the
big
language.
advantage.
Yes, exactly. Contrary to when I moved to the US and I didn't speak English at all. It was only Spanish.
Let's go there. So, what motivated you to go to United States?
So in my situation, which is my case is one case of someone migrating. So there's millions of cases. Everyone has a case, everyone has a story. My story, my particular case is unique. Yours is unique. And the
Exactly,
next
yeah.
person is unique. So I will tell you my particular story. Mine started, and mine is not adequate to say something made me go to the United States. No, it's someone, my entire family, from my father's side, moved to the United States in the 80s. So yeah, so by 1986, I remember 1986, I was about 7 years old, and it was the first time I heard my father saying that he was in New York City. I didn't understand. I knew my parents had separated. I knew my father was not living at home with me anymore, and I saw him a few times after he moved out. But one day in December, he called and he said, "Hello, I'm in New York City now," and I was 7 years old when my father promised me for the first time. He made the promise, I will bring you to the US to live with me. And that promise changed my life. The way I saw my my the way I was growing up because I every day I look forward for being somewhere else.
What
And I
about your mom?
continue. Well, my mom was part of it. My mom wanted me to be with my father. So this is exactly why I share this part because culturally, my environment was basically groomed and designed to go to the United States one day. My mother was preparing me psychologically. My mother was motivating me to say, one day you're going to be with your father. It was always clear to me that I was going to go to the United States only one way, and that was crossing the border.
I think it's very common in Mexico, right? People want to go out or live in United States
A
because
little bit.
millions of people are going to United States. Do you guys say Mexico or Mexico?
In Spanish is the X. It's only that particular for the word Mexico, and some names like Xavier, excuse me. But the rule is that only for the word Mexico, the X is pronounced as. So in Spanish we say Mexico,
I see.
but in
Okay.
English is Mexico.
Okay, good to know. I don't know where I'm going to use.
It's all right, but thanks for asking. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Technically, what I'm trying to do is to understand an immigrant's emotions and your experience, right? So just keep telling your story. And your father asked you to go there. Your mom was okay. Keep going, please.
One of the problems with knowing that one day I was going to move to the US was that I was always telling people I was going to leave, and it never happened. Every year after year, my father was coming up with excuses like, "Oh, sorry." I mean, literally one year he come with the excuse that the winter was so strong that it was impossible for me to go because there was a lot of snow. And I was a kid. I even imagined the Texas covering snow, and or like places in the United States where there's no snow. I pictured, so I understood. I was like, okay, I can't go because there's a lot of snow. I can't cross. So I would share that with my friends. I would tell them, well, after all, I'm not leaving because the winter's bad. Every year there was an excuse. But this tells you a little bit about my emotions, how my mom never stopped motivating me. So like this is why I say I was literally groomed to understand and to know that that was my destiny. It happened until I turned 17. When I was 17, I
Oh,
was a teenager.
let me understand perfectly. He contact you when you were
I was 7 years old when
7 years old,
was
and you went there. It's when you were 17.
10 years later.
10
Yes.
years. Wow, it's
It
really
was
a
a,
little tough.
it was a process. It was a process. It was I in a way my father had to come up with the money, and not only that, uh, he had to come up with knowing someone that he could trust, that he could bring me safely, because it's
Yeah,
a
I understand.
network. It's a
Of course.
network, and it's humans that run this business or this cultural forms of making a living.
Yes.
It's controversial. It's controversial. People are against it. People support it. I am a supporter, but because I went through the good way of doing it, the clean way. I was lucky. My father was lucky enough to know the right person.
What I'm seeing from here is actually your father did the right thing. Exactly. I'm thinking that way. Was he immigrant or refugee?
Well, that's the other side of the story that when I was a kid, I didn't understand. And this is the other problem that a lot of people don't understand. Everybody believes that the system welcomes anybody who stays, and that's it. No, I didn't know my father was living undocumentedly. He was an undocumented immigrant in the US. I didn't know that. I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
Uh, and it was a particular case because everyone else in the family, his sisters, his brother-in-laws, everyone else in my family, um, became legal residents when in 1986, I believe, Ronald Reagan made an amnesty and everyone became legal.
Yes.
The situation was that my father had just arrived recently when that happened, so he didn't understand. He couldn't get into the lottery or whatever it was, and he missed the chance. My father was the only member in the family.
So sad.
He became eventually a resident of the U.S. and but it took him a long time. So when I made it to the U.S., the way he brought me was the only way he could.
That's
It was the only option. It was the only option. My mother, on and off, hired a teacher that to come give me private classes, and she encouraged me to learn. I did not learn, but I knew words and stuff.
Right. Actually, you are lucky. Both are thinking of you. They were thinking of you, which is okay. Where is your mom now?
My mom's in Mexico. My mom still lives in Mexico City. My father passed away. My father passed away in 2019.
I'm sorry to hear that. Don't you think to bring her?
My mom's very sick right now. Her health is very deteriorated, so it's very complicated. So I go visit. I was there 2 months ago. She had 12 strokes, micro strokes. So she's in a wheelchair and she's
Sorry to hear that. What a life. What about
but she's still around. She's still around.
What about your siblings?
Yes, I have a brother and a sister in Mexico City, and I have two sisters in New York City. So that's
she's not
also.
alone.
Oh yeah, my mother's not alone in Mexico. Yeah, she has my siblings.
How did you go to the United States? What takes you to there? What happened?
Well, in a way, I crossed a little bit of Mexico because I had to travel from Mexico City to the border. Mexico City is in the centers in the south. So in a way, I had to cross my country in order to make it to the north in the border, and then cross the border and then go north from Arizona to New York City. So the whole process took 2 weeks from the day I left Mexico City, maybe 2.5 weeks from the day I left Mexico City. 2.5 weeks later, I was in New York City. And I had already passed through Mexico, all the states of Mexico, and some of the states of the U.S. because we drove from Arizona to New York City.
You drove. Okay, I see. Or somebody drove. Your father? Who came to
No. This is a very interesting question because people don't understand, people don't know, and everybody thinks, oh, my father came up with the money, he went to the border, he crosses me, and no, that's not how it works. The network of the people that took me to the border, they all know where to go, what bus to take, who to talk to. When I made it to the border in the state of Mexico, that was still the side of Mexico, we stayed in a hotel. I was surrounded by all Mexicans. In that hotel, everybody was going to cross. Everybody was getting ready to cross. Once we crossed, which is a long story, it's a very long story, but I will not tell you the details because it's too long. But once I crossed to the United States side, it was an American woman, the typical stereotype of an American woman from the poor side of society of Americans. I will not use the expression because it's not okay for you to publish it, but the person had the stereotype of the poor society of Americans, and she was the one who put 7 Mexicans in the car and drove to Phoenix, Arizona.
Okay.
Through the state of Arizona, from the south of Arizona through the north, which is going towards Phoenix. She drove a small Honda car. I don't remember the model, but with 7 Mexicans in it.
I thought it's a van or something.
No, she was the one who crossed me to the States. So
you had the paperwork, right? Officially, your father invited you or get your paperwork ready, I assume.
What paperwork?
No, I thought your father prepared all that legal documents
Well,
except you?
there is no, there is no legal documents involved in when you cross the border. It's only
I see.
word to word, phone calls, money transactions. That's it. No one signs a paper. No, it's your word, your honor, your trust, and your fear, and the money that make this happen. And it's controversial. People don't understand, but this is not something that Mexicans invented, and this part of the world. And the I believe the slavery in the United States, part of the people that escaped slavery made it through the Underground Railroad. And the Underground Railroad is the expression they use for the network of people that help slaves escape to Canada, to the north from
Yeah.
the United States.
Believe me, yeah, I know very well because not only from Mexicans, but also from Turkey, a lot of people came through Mexico
Yeah.
using the same networking.
Exactly. So there's no legal documents, nothing. I guess my father never told me the details. He gave me a general idea. I guess he spoke with his friend. His friend told him, "My brother is coming next month." And my father told his friend, "Your brother, that means someone you know." He's like, "Do you know the person that is crossing him?" And he said, "Yes, it's a it's a lady, it's a woman." I make the point because people don't think it's a man's job. It's a
Yeah,
network of human beings.
I
Um,
see.
and he said, "This lady, everybody trusts her." I guess my father had to come up with some money just to pay for me to travel from Mexico City to the north. And then after that, it was all in the United States. The connection, the money transfer was in the United States. He
All
never
right.
told me how.
So you arrived in New York City, and your father was working there, I assume. Of course, I mean, right?
Yeah,
And
that's when I already saw my dad in New York City.
okay, he had new family,
He had a new family, as I had
and
two
you
little
had suddenly
sisters. And
new siblings, all that stuff.
yeah.
How did you feel when you were going at New York City between the border? You were very young, 17-year-old. Do you remember your emotions, fear, or I don't know, excitement? What? How did you feel?
The first feeling, the first emotion I had that I experienced, that this excitement, was immediately when we crossed, that we got into that lady's car, and we started driving. I was still thinking, man, we're gonna get caught again, because we got caught a couple times before crossing. And I was like, oh man, we're gonna get caught again. It was daylight. It was 1 in the afternoon in the Arizona hot desert. Um, when she started driving the car, and I was sitting up. We were 7 Mexicans. Only 4 of us were sitting up. The rest were on the floor, and one in the back and the trunk. So we were all trying to pretend we were normal people driving. This is magical. This is magical. And we were driving, and there was a police car next to us. And I'm thinking, I have the most Mexican face in the world. These guys next to me have more Mexican faces in the world. How can this guy not see us? Those were my emotions, that I'm like, I'm invisible to these men now. I was confused. And my fellow crossmates, I would say, my fellow crossmates, they were blessing themselves. They were crying, they were praying, they were thanking God. And that's something I cannot describe to you as in a funny way. It's what people feel when you are accomplishing something you pay for, something you wanted to do, but you don't know that you're doing something wrong. How could you believe you're doing something wrong when you're thanking God for helping you to do it? How God is helping you to do it, and people don't understand that if God helps you to build a country, God is helping them to cross. Whether God doesn't know who that person is. So my crossing mates were blessing themselves, crying, thanking God. I was the only one worried. Man, this police car is right next to us, looking at us, and is he gonna stop us? And no, we kept going. They made a turn, they walked away, and that's when I realized the power of the woman that was driving the car.
Maybe she has some friends in the legal side.
You know, when you come from Mexico, that's your first thought, that the police and the civilians are working together. I don't know.
You
I
know,
have no, I do not know.
of course, we cannot know. Nobody knows. Okay, your emotions when you are getting closer and closer to your father. Have you ever seen him after
No,
separation?
my father left in 1986. He went back in 1993. You know, 8 years, 7 years, 8 years later, and then after 93, he didn't go back to Mexico. I saw him until 97, 4 years later. So I knew who my father was. I had a vision of him, but remember, there was no internet, but we didn't have
Yeah,
this
not
back
like
then.
that.
No, this was technology in the movies for us. So my emotions were like, yeah, I was excited. I wanted to see my father. I was curious. I knew I was already a 17-year-old kid.
Yeah, you were a teenager, of
I was
course.
a
Yeah.
rebel. I was a rebel. I was partying. I was doing not I didn't do bad things. I was just partying, but I knew my father was not gonna transform me, but I was wrong. He helped me a lot, but in a different way.
What kind of teenager you were?
My mother was very young, and I have a wild family on her side. Very loving, but we are very colorful. So I didn't have a discipline from my mother's side, but I had the freedom. My mother gave me the freedom to do whatever I wanted. So
Mhm.
I always felt the responsibility of not doing the wrong thing.
She is lucky too. Yeah, I mean, you could go easily the wrong way. There's no
Yeah.
father, there's no discipline that way.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was always afraid of doing the wrong thing, but I was not good in school. I was always distracted in school. I was never paying attention in school. I loved school because of my friends and because of the teachers. I love being around the teachers because they were the only ones teaching me discipline. And I'm not making statements here just to honor teachers. No, I'm a teacher. I know how bad they can be or how good they can be. I'm not the best. But when I was a kid, I just needed that discipline from the adults. I was looking for discipline from adults that I didn't have at home.
So
So I
when you
didn't,
arrived to New York, did you feel that discipline by your father?
yes, yeah. And then that was bad. That was
You
bad.
weren't happy, I guess.
Yes, because then I was like, no, hold on a second. Remember, I got there and then immediately I turned 18. So I was like, no, hold on. You're not gonna teach me how to do this. I already know it. I had that mentality.
I know, yeah. But he's the father. I
He
mean,
was, yeah.
discipline for your good, not for
In a way,
his
yes, in a way.
satisfaction.
There were things he wanted to discipline that I didn't agree with, and I still don't agree. And I never got them right. He had philosophies and ideas that I didn't share, and I'm glad my mother was a big influence on my culture more than my father. So yeah,
Of course.
my father was more my influence of being a worker and working for a living, and my mother was more of being a man
Yeah,
responsible.
yeah, I see. So what about the language? Did you have any trouble when you came to the United States?
No, not at all, because I didn't speak English, but since I tell you, like, I was groomed. My mother almost always encouraged me to. It sounds bad, but it is what it is. In a way, my mother and culture in Mexico always pushed me to be Americanized, like to have an American influence in music and cinema and everything, literature, everything. So I was always listening to rock music more than Spanish. I was always listening to watching movies in English more than Spanish movies. So the language came in about a year, in about 1 year living in New York City. And New York City English is not the best English of the
Yeah,
world. I was learning Greek and Italian and Spanish, of course, more Spanish words, because Spanish is also a big language for me. So um, in 1 year, I believe in 1 year I started going to high school, so that also I started going to school. You have to go to school. Everybody
You
has to go
didn't
to
have
school.
any trouble for English. Then finished high school, and then
I
did you
graduated high school.
choose your profession or?
I graduated high school in 2000. I was already 20 years old when a regular kid graduates when they're 18. But I had the great opportunity that in New York City, back in those days, there was help for citizens, and I was the beneficiary of one of those great programs that help immigrant kids accomplish a high school diploma. They even gave me a Metro card to use transportation to go to school. So basically, they were paying me to go to school. And I am so grateful they did that. And I didn't disappoint. And I always loved the teachers doing that because it was a school for the rejects, all the new immigrants and the students that didn't graduate in regular high school, they were sent to that school. So I was mixed with students that were between 18 and 21. And the language I absorbed was, man, it was a beautiful thing, beautiful experience.
I see. Yeah. So you went to college.
After that, I didn't go to college. I graduated, and when I applied to go to college, I got accepted. But then that's when I faced the reality of being an immigrant and not having the help, financial support. That's when I faced it like, ooh, now I have to pay for my education, which I was not ready at the time, and eventually I did. But that's when I faced that, ooh, if you're not a legal citizen, you don't get this benefit of paying little by little, the payment program or financial support where you don't even pay. So that's when I faced it. So I couldn't go to college until 8 years later when I was
I see.
28 years old.
Very dear. I see. What was your status? You were
So
immigrant?
after I was undocumented for 3-4 years,
All right.
and then
21 years.
yeah, and then no, I'm sorry. After 3-4 years, I met my first wife. I married an American woman, and she sponsored me to have a work permit.
I see. All right.
So I lived my entire life in the United States with a work permit.
I see. It's something.
Yeah, yes, I had something.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the words, but when you live, it's harder, I assume. So what happened after that? How did you come to Canada?
After well, I made a life in Mexico, life in the US. I married. I have children. I've been married twice. I have kids. Now my oldest son is 20 years old. I moved back to Mexico because I I was I was already tired of living in the United States and not being able to go outside and be free. I was living in the golden cage. I
I know
I
what you
had
mean.
my kids are US citizens. I had a US citizen wife. I could travel inside the country. I could have credit. I have a driver's license. I could work mainly in a lot of places. I could live okay inside the United States, but I could not go outside.
Why
And
not?
because my work permit was not valid for reentry.
I see. Yeah, like refugees, sort of.
Something like that. Yeah. But
I
remember,
see.
I crossed the border, so I didn't have a visa. When I applied for a work permit, they asked for a visa, and the option said I don't have. I still qualify for a work permit, but then I was never going to get a resident
But you
card.
were married with an American woman, for God's sake. You
The
had children.
the
It's so
the
silly.
laws in the US are different from the laws in Canada.
I
They're
see.
they both have hard or harsh laws, but they both have very beneficiary laws. They're good laws, but yes, it's complicated. Is what I was
Yeah,
saying. Not because you live in one country for a long time, that means you can be a citizen. At least that's
it's
not the case here.
it's a huge decision to go back to Mexico because you may not go back home. I'll call home now. Wow, it's really
Yes, it
impressive.
was a bit, yeah, and it cost me a lot. It's I won't share the details, but it cost me a lot. It in a way changed my life dramatically. It was bad in the beginning. Now it's becoming worthy, and yes, I lost a lot, but it was the path that I had to take at the time.
So have you ever regret about that
Oh yeah,
decision?
I do regret a lot, but I'm not happy to change it.
It was
I,
too late, yeah. So how did you feel when your first day in Canada?
it was interesting for me. So I knew very little about Canada. I knew enough, but I didn't have an idea of how Canada looked like. And the first day when I arrived here, um, I was in a relationship, and she picked me up in the airport, and she took me to downtown, to the mall, Rideau Center. Now I think is where I was. I remember that I was in the mall with my bags and having a coffee, and I said to myself, my first day in Canada, that was it. I was like, oh my God, this is home. And it's controversial for me to say that because people don't understand that culturally.
Yeah.
And I had no plans of staying in Canada. I was just here as a tourist. I was visiting for the first time. And I felt that because I was living in Mexico at the time, and I had been living in Mexico for 4 years after leaving the US. So I left New York City in 2015. I moved back to Mexico City, and then 4 years later, I came to Canada.
Which one is better, United States or Canada? You are the best person to ask that question, actually.
I appreciate it. Thanks for trusting my judgment. And it is true. People say that, and people ask me all the time when I tell them I was born in Mexico, but I grew up in the US. They always tell me where is better. Or the 90% of the question is the times the question is, why are you here? As in, not as in they are upset that I'm here. It's just why did you change New York for Ottawa? Um, and the other and most of the time it's like, oh, they are just in shock that I made that change. I came here in different circumstances, and I came here legally. That's the other side of when I say immigrants evolve. I evolve, and the way I came to Canada was different. Now I came through the legal path. Um, it was long and it was long and difficult because it was during the pandemic, but I endured it, and I had the support, and it was amazing. It's good. Now facing the Canadian culture is it's being complicated, but I am adapting. I'm adapting. I like being here. It's just I didn't know it was like this. As a country, the US. As a society, Canada.
Very good answer, actually.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a good way. I just my perspective is like I know enough history. I know enough history to understand why they behave like that. And I obviously I can be debated. I can be thought like you're wrong, but I know enough history to understand that. And it has to do with immigration. It has to do with the way Native Americans lived. Um, in Mexico, we behave the way we behave because that's how the Aztecs and the Mayans behave. And when the Europeans came, they didn't bring the way we behave in Europe. They behave the way we behave here. So they just changed the color of the picture. But in Mexico, we have big parties, big markets, big everything, big cities, because that's how it was back then. Here in Canada, the life is more quiet, more peaceful because that's how the Native Americans used to live. The weather here is different from Mexico.
Do you think there's a discrimination in Canada? Actually, you can tell me in United States, did you feel any discrimination?
I felt it more here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I lived 20 years in the United States, and I guess I was discriminated. I believe so, but if I tell you that I felt it and that I knew, I can say probably once in 20 years. Here, in my first 2 years, I faced discrimination, but from people that I knew, I like from I mean, from someone that was just like,
From the people or the government or government employees, which are
both. Right now I have experience from both, from the system and from people, but I to be fair, I don't know if it's some form of discrimination, because now um I have a different interpretation. I think it has to do more with mental health and the way we behave in the working environment. So now I see more like negligence than discrimination.
I say, yeah. So many people are talking about. I don't feel honest. I don't know. Maybe I am wrong. And then finding a job, or how did it work?
Well, that jumps to another part of the topic of how an immigrant evolves and becomes a different immigrant, because the way that I migrated to Canada this time was legal. This time was with a passport, with a permit, and a legal process to become a Canadian,
What
a
with the
new Canadian.
passport? US passport or Mexican
No,
passport?
Mexican passport. No, I entered here as a Mexican. Yeah.
Mexican, I see. So you applied, become an immigrant. You did all the procedure, and you put your money in your pocket, get your PR paper, long big paper, and you join us.
Yeah.
All right.
That's correct.
Then keep going, please.
So the original question was, I
A
forgot.
job, finding job.
Oh, finding the job. So no, that was the process that was the difficult side, because during the time that I applied to become a Canadian, I couldn't work. So it was difficult to find a job. But when it finally happened, this is interesting too, because I am an immigrant and I lived in the US for 20 years. So when I started looking for a job in Canada, I knew I was not going to get a job as a teacher, as a diplomat, or as an executive. I knew I was not going to have the $30 an hour job. I knew I had to start from the bottom. And and that took me back to the way I was groomed to become an immigrant, that I knew I had to start little by little and getting rubbed in with the culture in Canada, understanding the environment, learning the transportation system to move in the city. Because if I needed to go to a job in different parts of the city, I needed to know how to move, because I didn't want to have a car. I don't want to have a car, and it's expensive to have a car. So I needed to learn all that stuff. And I had the experience because I lived in New York City and I lived in Mexico City, and I know how to survive in a city.
Big cities, three of them.
Yes. It's advantage. Yeah. So finding that job was not difficult. It was difficult because I had to take anything. I'm still taking any jobs I can. I'm a teacher and I'm not working as a teacher. I just teach.
What do you teach?
I teach English as a second language in all forms. I do writing, reading, and speaking, grammar rules, and everything. I can teach different forms and different topics of ESL. I have I've been teaching online on and off, but the last time I was a teacher in an institution was in Mexico City in 2019, 2020, I mean, early 2020. That was the last time I was a teacher in an institution. So when I came here to Canada, I didn't expect to have. So yeah,
So-
that part with the job was the difficult part is accepting that I had to do anything else again.
Yeah, but you are an immigrant. Immigrants do that, right?
It's in me. Yes, it's in me. It's in
Yeah,
me. I'm not. It's not. I mean, it's part of me, and I have to do it. Now I'm comfortable.
nearly everybody lives that one. When I was in the Navy, I was the commander, and I came here. My rank was commander, and I started a job first. I cried. I said, "What am I doing here?" Because
Oh wow.
suddenly changing very low level. I mean, entry level.
Yeah.
It's hard to accept.
Yeah.
And how did you accept that?
And I understand that I didn't have that level of entitled like the title like you do, but because interesting, I spent 20 years in the United States doing odd jobs. I was a bartender, I was a waiter, I was a dog walker, I was a student, I was going to college, I was a father, I did all kinds of jobs. I did construction. Um, and when I moved back to Mexico, the only job I had was teaching. So in Mexico City, I was just a teacher and I was Mr. Garcia. I just became like Mr. Garcia or Teacher Garcia. When in the United States for 20 years, no one ever called me Mr. Garcia unless it was an appointment or a doctor or I was in trouble. But uh, in Mexico City, I just became a teacher, and it was a title, it was a respect, and it was like a title that I suddenly gained. I can tell you literally in 1 week when I moved back to Mexico, because when I went back to Mexico, I had a college degree, I had the language and the knowledge, and I had teaching experience because I was a volunteer tutor in community services and centers in New York City. So I had a little bit of teaching experience, but then in Mexico City, I started working for companies that provide me training to teach executives in companies like Walmart, Citibank, and stuff like that. Because these executives are Mexicans, they need to learn English to communicate with the world. So the English teacher demand was high when I moved back to Mexico City. And these companies train me and they provide me all the information that I needed to know how to be a teacher, how to learn to teach. So then I applied, I got certifications, 2 or 3 certifications, and then I started applying for jobs. And the jobs in teachers, the teacher jobs in Mexico, they require licenses and certifications. But, but for English teachers, it looks beautiful to have a diploma from the United States. And not just a university diploma, a high school diploma, because I went to high school. So a lot of professionals can go to Mexico City and they say they went to university, which is great. They have a lot of money and they pay for that. But I went to a public high school in the US. I have a diploma from the high school level. So I did more years of academia. So I had that, and that opened the doors in Mexico, opened the doors culturally, because they knew I had the knowledge of the language.
Can't you find a job here as a ESL teacher?
I try, and yes, it's possible, and I did when I came to Canada and I couldn't work. I was teaching online from my clients that I had in Mexico and Colombia. So it was good because it was outside it was money that I didn't earn in Canada. I earned it outside, and I was allowed to do that legally. A certain amount of money. I couldn't
Yeah,
make
of course.
10,000, 10. But I was allowed because this money was not generated in Canada. So I was teaching it was interesting because I was teaching Chinese students in China, living in China, and I was teaching students in Mexico City or
I
other
see.
parts
Yeah.
of Mexico. And it was interesting because I could see the cultural differences. But I experienced a little bit discrimination because I'm not, Canadian or American as visibly speaking, but because I am 100% American. Just
Yeah.
if I have to explain why, well, it's because I'm a Mexican that has Aztec blood and Spanish blood. And well,
I
the
see.
Spanish were the first ones in the continent, so in Mexico at least. So I'm an original American,
Mhm.
genetically speaking, but when it comes to the North, they tend to specify how you have to look. So I faced a little bit of discrimination finding a job as an ESL teacher because I have the knowledge, but not maybe not what they expect to see. And also I
Okay.
have an accent. You can hear I have an accent.
Yeah, I
And
know, but I'm gonna tell you this. In 1999, I migrated. In year 2000, I had, I think, three different ESL teachers. One of them had a really very heavy British accent. She was from England. The second one was Chinese, and we saw him. He was speaking perfect, though. He said, "Yeah,
mm,
I know what you are thinking, but I'm gonna teach you. Don't worry." He said.
yeah.
The third one was not the teacher, but I think he was teaching too. He was the black guy from Kenya, I guess. And he said that, sorry for my broken English, but don't worry, all immigrants will speak with accent, and
Mhm.
I'm gonna teach you all that stuff. I never forget he said that my broken English. My point is, see that time, 24 years ago, I had three immigrants were my teacher, and one of my Turkish friends was teaching too.
Wow.
So what? But now you are saying that there's a discrimination. It's sort of interesting because the after 2 decades, things has been changed. Maybe I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm only talking about my case, right? Like what I perceive or maybe not what I perceive, but uh, what I could tell, because also some of these companies, when they were posting jobs, the classifies the one of the qualifications or the requirements was to be a Canadian native speaker, and it said Canadian, British, American, Irish, Scottish, Australian. I mean, all the countries related to the English language, native speaker. So, for example, I am not a native speaker, but I have enough knowledge of the language to teach the grammar rules. And I have a certification that was given to me by Cambridge University, and it's called the Teaching Knowledge Test. They tested my knowledge, how much knowledge I have of the language. And I score, well, you can only score 3 bands, like 1, 2, and 3. The top is 1, the top is 3. The more is 2, and the worse is 1. I scored 2. I scored the second one of almost the highest in the knowledge of the language and in the teaching knowledge. Like I can teach, I know how to teach. But because I'm not a native speaker, I couldn't apply to that job.
So what do you do?
Oof, oh my God. So I have two jobs, and I'm preparing to have a third job. And my 3 jobs, if I say that now, are 3 different jobs. One is teaching, one is in the food industry, bartending, and the other one is in retail stores, as you know.
Why don't you do your profession as
And
an
teach
ESL teacher?
um Because I applied last month, 2 months ago, I applied for a job. I don't want to mention where I applied because it's not important. I went through the interview. I was very excited. I honestly had the interpretation that I passed the interview. I made them smile. I made them take notes. I made them make gestures that wow. And they never called me. They never contacted me. Unless I think only a week later they asked me to send more another professional contact, like yeah, personal reference or professional reference. I did, and that person told me that they contacted them to inquire information about me. She said, "Oh, the school contacted me." I said, "Okay, so you can go ahead and reply." She did, and I never heard from them. That's fine. I said, okay, that's fine. But last month or a few weeks ago, I read in the news that cell phones are going to be forbidden in schools right now, and kids and parents are protesting. And I said, goodbye, thank you. I changed my mind. I'm not gonna be a teacher in this system. And it's the reality. If you ask people here, if they know Canadian history, they know more who Abraham Lincoln is. They know who George Washington is. They never share with me any Canadian figures, important figures, historical figures. I never heard of one.
Do you regret of being in Canada? You are Canadian citizen, right?
PR. I have a PR.
Still PR? I see.
I'm on the path.
You
and I
can
want to
apply though, 5 years already. Yeah, you can apply. Yeah, will you be able to go? No, you cannot right now to United States.
Not
After
yet,
you
not yet.
became United States Canadian citizen, you can go
Yeah.
there. I see.
Yeah.
It's exciting too. So you
Yeah.
can see your family, your children.
Exactly. That's
see.
important. That's important. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Do you recommend the other people migrate to Canada?
Oh yes. Oh my God. Hell yes. I'm always telling people. I mean, I feel confident that now I do enough for this society. With 3 jobs, I pay enough taxes. And I feel confident to say this is a beautiful city where we live. It's clean, it's fresh, it's slow, it's different. People call it boring, but it's exciting if you have enough knowledge to survive doing what you like to do.
Okay. Thank you very much. Would you like to say last words before we finish, wrap up?
That sounds like I'm going to be sentenced. Um, thank you for inviting me for this, Joe. It's nice. I feel very confident talking in the microphone like this. There are times where I want to express more about the Canadian culture, but I don't want to do it in a negative way. I want to do it in an optimistic way. We are living moments and in time right now where the opportunity for the people that want them, it's right there, because a lot of people are walking away from opportunities they don't have the desire to do, and I'm the opposite. So a lot of things are happening because I am taking everything that people don't want. I'm not encouraging to do it in a bad way. It's just I feel mental health right now in this city is affecting everyone.
All right. Thank you, Abraham. We can make another video next time.
Yes, sir.
And
Anytime.
thank you
Anytime,
very much.
man.
Have a nice day.
You too, man.